8 words. That is all it took to redirect $500 billion away from the United States. Not a war, not a sanctions package. 8 words spoken calmly into a camera in Ottawa by a man Donald Trump called a failed banker. And what happened in the 72 hours that followed should concern every American who pays an energy bill, drives a car, or works in manufacturing. Stay with me, because the numbers coming out this morning are not projections. They already happened. Donald Trump had a plan for Canada. It was simple. Apply pressure, humiliate publicly, wait for them to crawl back. 3 weeks ago, at a rally in Montana, Trump told the crowd that Canada was not a real country. He called it a province that got too big for its bridges. He said they would come crawling back when they needed us. Trump's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnik then delivered what Reuters confirmed was an ultimatum to Canadian officials. Before the United States would agree to review the USMCA trade agreement, Canada would need to pay what Lutnik called a financial commitment to fair trade principles. No dollar amount, no definition. Just pay up, then maybe we talk. That was the demand made to America's largest trading partner, the country that supplies 48% of all U.S. crude oil imports, the country that sends $673 billion in goods across the American border every single year. The country Trump assumed had no other options. Mark Carney walked to the podium in Ottawa and said 8 words. We are not taking instructions from the United States. If you are not already subscribed, hit that button now, because what he did next in 72 hours is the reason this story matters and why we are tracking it every single day. Carney announced Canada would immediately begin redirecting 23% of its export focus toward Asian markets within 18 months. Trade delegations were already assembled. Agreements with Japan, South Korea, and Singapore were being fast-tracked before he finished speaking. Wall Street opened the next morning down 412 points. That is not a coincidence. Statistics Canada released preliminary trade figures covering just the 72 hours following Carney's announcement. Canadian companies redirected or canceled purchase orders worth $89 billion in American goods. Not in a year, in 3 days. Here is where it gets serious for American workers. Alberta-based Energy signed a 15-year supply agreement with a consortium of Asian refiners. Volume: 1.2 million barrels per day. That is crude oil that was flowing to refineries in Texas and Louisiana. Past tense. TC Energy, which operates pipelines feeding the American Midwest, announced it is now exploring a partnership with South Korean firms to build liquefied natural gas terminals on Canada's west coast. The company's CEO told CNBC the decision was made in response to an increasingly unreliable trade environment. Read that again. An ally publicly calling America an unreliable partner. That sentence did not exist in the diplomatic vocabulary 2 years ago. Now pay attention here, because this is where the story stops being about Canada and starts being about every ally America has. On April 24th, Carney flew to Brussels. Canada and the European Union finalized a comprehensive economic partnership that had been stalled for 18 months. Ratification took 72 hours. The deal eliminates tariffs on 98% of goods and creates regulatory alignment that makes Canada-EU trade as frictionless as Canada-US trade used to be. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stood at the signing podium and said this: "Reliable partners do not weaponize interdependence." The room knew exactly who she meant. 2 days later, Carney landed in Tokyo. Japan had been waiting for a committed North American partner since Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership in 2017. Canada just became that partner. The framework agreement covers energy, technology, automotive manufacturing, and rare earth minerals. The EU deal represents $240 billion in new trade access over 5 years. The Japan agreement adds another $190 billion. Combined, that is $430 billion in 72 hours. By a man Trump called a failed banker. Understand who Mark Carney actually is, because this matters enormously. He was governor of the Bank of Canada from 2008 to 2013. Then he ran the Bank of England until 2020. The man who hired him in London was David Cameron, a conservative. Carney is not an ideologue. He is a cold-blooded economist. When a cold-blooded economist decides your country is an unreliable trading partner and acts on that decision with $430 billion in contracts in 72 hours, he is not making a political statement. He is making a structural one. And here is the part that should keep American policymakers awake tonight. Structural decisions are not reversed by a phone call or a softened tone or a new trade proposal. They are reversed by years of rebuilt trust, if they are reversed at all. The LNG terminals being planned on Canada's west coast are not a negotiating tactic. They are infrastructure. The 15-year energy contracts being signed with Asian refiners are not a bluff. They are binding. By the time Washington fully grasps what shifted this week, the concrete will already be dry. There is a deeper logic running underneath all of this that almost no one in American media is naming directly. Trump's foreign policy operates on a single assumption that has governed Washington for 75 years. Allies need America more than America needs them. That assumption was always partially true. The United States has the world's largest economy, the deepest capital markets, the strongest military, and the reserve currency. Those advantages are real, and they created a dynamic where allies tolerated behavior from Washington they would not tolerate from anyone else. But here is a word that destroys that assumption: tolerated. Tolerating a partner and depending on a partner are not the same thing. What Carney demonstrated this week with $430 billion in 72 hours is that the dependency Washington assumed was permanent was actually a choice. A choice Canada made year after year when it sent 77% of its exports south because the American market was closer, easier, and more profitable than the alternatives. Trump turned that choice into a liability. Carney responded by making a different one. And now, South Korea is running the same arithmetic. Japan is watching American treaty obligations being treated like shakedowns. Germany spent 2 years rebuilding its energy infrastructure after depending on a single supplier. That lesson was supposed to be about Russia. It applies equally to any partner who weaponizes interdependence. You can threaten an ally once and call it leverage. You can threaten them twice and call it strategy. But when they stop answering the phone and start signing deals with someone else, the word for what you have lost is not leverage, it is relevance. Here is what we know with certainty right now. Canada signed trade deals worth $430 billion with Europe and Japan in 72 hours. Canadian companies canceled or redirected $89 billion in American purchase orders in 3 days. A 15-year energy contract redirecting 1.2 million barrels per day to Asian refiners is signed and binding. The USMCA review is legally required to begin in July, with or without American participation. 99% of American potash comes from Canada, and there is no short-term alternative. And Mark Carney was elected on a platform of reducing dependency. He just delivered exactly what he promised. What nobody knows yet is whether Washington understands that what just happened this week cannot be undone. Trump's own signature achievement, the USMCA, was designed to lock Canada into the American economic orbit. He called it the greatest trade deal ever made. 5 years later, his demand for an entry fee to review his own deal is precisely what pushed Canada to build the exit. The irony does not get more precise than that. For 75 years, American power rested on 2 pillars: military strength that no one could match and economic gravity that no one could escape. The military pillar still stands, but this week, for the first time, an ally demonstrated publicly, with $430 billion in contracts, that the economic gravity can be escaped. And once that proof exists, it cannot be erased. I want your honest take on a specific question because I think it is the most important unanswered question in international economics right now. Can Canada actually replace American market access with European and Asian alternatives long term? Or does the geography, the infrastructure, and the sheer scale of the US economy quietly undo this pivot over the next 2 to 3 years? There are people reading this right now who work in energy, in supply chain logistics, in trade finance, and in cross-border manufacturing. This is your question. Tell me what the numbers say when you strip away the politics entirely. If you have been following our daily coverage of the US-Canada fracture, this is the episode where the rhetoric ended and the structural phase began. We update this story every day because the situation is moving faster than any weekly format can track. Subscribe so you do not miss what happens when the concrete dries. Trump told Canada to crawl. Canada signed $430 billion in deals and did not look back. Drop your take in the comments. If this kind of daily analysis is what you have been looking for, subscribing takes 1 second and it keeps this work going.